Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. I, Valerian, Antichrist, in the year 1949 of the rule of the Black Brotherhood called Christianity, do make my manifesto to all men. I come among you, saying, an end to the pretense and the lying hypocrisy of Christianity, an end to the servile virtues and superstitious restrictions, an end to the slave morality, an end to prudery and shame, to guilt and sin, an end to all authority that is not based on the courage and manhood, to the authority of lying priests, conniving judges, blackmailing police, and an end to restriction and inhibition, an end to conscription, compulsion, regimentation, and the tyranny of false laws. For I, the Antichrist, have come among you, preaching the word of the beast 666, which is, there is no law beyond do what thou wilt. And in his law I shall conquer the world, and within 7 years of this time, Babylon, the scarlet woman Hilarion, will manifest among ye, and bring my work to its fruition. And within 9 years a nation shall accept the law of the beast in my name, and that nation will be the first nation of earth. And all who accept me, the Antichrist, and the law of the beast shall be accursed, and their joy shall be 1,000-fold greater than the false joys of the false saints. And in my name, Valerian, shall they work miracles and confound our enemies, and none shall stand before us. Therefore I, the Antichrist, call upon you, the chosen, and elect upon all men. Come forth now in the name of liberty, that we may end forever the tyranny of the Black Brotherhood.
Those were the words of Jack Parsons, rocket engineer, chemist, co-founder of the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, and an occultist. In recent years, news media has begun to reevaluate and deconstruct the Satanic Panic, a bout of mass hysteria that afflicted the United States for over a decade. But what if it wasn't just hysteria? What if some of it was true? Ritual Rewind brings you into the darkest corners of the 1980s, uncovering the crimes, conspiracies, and occult fears that shaped a generation. Tonight, we go way back and delve into the case of Jack Parsons, the father of rocketry. It's a tale of sex, magic, and outer space. It's the case of the devil and the magician, and I'm your host, Drew, and you're listening to The Ritual Rewind. At 5:08 p.m. on June 17, 1952, an explosion ripped through the city of Pasadena. It could be felt for over a mile away from its epicenter at 1071 South Orange Grove. The blast came from a coach house behind the residence.
Two men who had been renting rooms in the main house rushed into the coach house.
Inside, they discovered a ceiling collapsed, a hole blown out of the floor, and a man lying sprawled in the debris. His legs broken and twisted, his skin scarred black, and his right arm gone. The right side of his face had melted away, and his jawbone had been exposed. This man was Jack Parsons. Wafting through the air were singed papers with weird symbols and occultist charts written in forgotten languages. But the men's attention was drawn to a large mural painted on the wall. It was a painting of the Angel of Death. These two men would learn that day what the rest of the world would soon discover. Jack Parsons led a double life. Marvel Whiteside Parsons was born on October 2nd, 1914, but his parents called him Jack. He grew up in luxury, living on Millionaire's Row in Pasadena, and was likely educated by a private tutor until he reached junior high. This resulted in a lonely childhood, and he drowned himself in the newly minted genre of science fiction. It was Jules Verne's story, From the Earth to the Moon, that ignited his interest in space travel. At the time, the science of rocketry did not exist. There wasn't even a name for it. It was in junior high that Parsons met the man who would become his lifelong friend, Edward Foreman. They shared a love for outer space, rockets, and would scavenge local junkyards to build them, launching them from the dry riverbed of the Arroyo Seco. And there they assumed the motto, Ad Astra per Aspera, through rough ways to the stars. It was during this time that Parsons would have his first mystical experience when he attempted to invoke the devil in his childhood bedroom. And according to Parsons, it worked, and it scared him shitless. In 1933, Parsons enrolled in Pasadena Junior College and pursued a degree in chemistry, but soon had to drop out because it was financially unviable for him. The Great Depression had wiped out most of his wealth, and it was imperative that Parsons find a job to support his mother. Parsons took a job at the nearby Halifax Powder Company and worked with explosives, flares, and fireworks. It was in the same year that Parsons met his first wife, Helen Northrup, at a Christmas dance held at the First Baptist Church in Pasadena. Only 19 years old at the time, Parsons proposed marriage. On April 26, 1935, the couple were married at the Little Church of Flowers in Glendale, California. Parsons and Ed Foreman continued to construct and launch more sophisticated rockets. One day they found themselves wandering the Caltech campus where they met a graduate student named Frank Molina, and he became Parsons and Foreman's connection to Caltech. But more importantly, he was their connection to the scientific community. Thanks to Molina's link to the university, the group was allowed to test their designs in the labs of the Guggenheim Aeronautical Laboratories at Caltech Institute of Technology, or GALCIT. The group were known around campus derisively as the Suicide Squad for their lack of safety and protocols. Molina approached the National Academy of Sciences Committee and asked for funding for research in jet propulsion. They were given $10,000 to develop a rocket for jet-assisted takeoffs, also referred to as JATOs. To do this, they needed to create a propellant that could provide the necessary thrust in a controlled manner. In theory, it was quite simple. The rocket fuel needed to burn like a cigarette from one end only, but the mixtures frequently cracked and formed fissures as they dried, enlarging the burning surface and causing uneven burns and explosions. And while Parsons was mired in the muck of solving this problem, he would experience a spiritual awakening. In January 1939, Jack Parsons found himself in the attic of a house located on Winona Boulevard in Hollywood, California. He watched as a gaunt older man draped in a white robe stepped out from behind a thin veil with another woman. They were the priest and priestess, and the priest spoke.
I, priest and king, take thee, virgin pure and white without spot.
The ceremony merged rituals from Masonic and Catholic liturgy with a strong sexual motif. And as the ceremony continued, those in attendance would pair off and copulate. This was the Church of Thelema, and it was founded by Aleister Crowley. Crowley was born in 1875 to a wealthy family in England, and as a child, he was only permitted to read the Bible, which didn't stick, because as an adult, Crowley became an infamous character in both London and Paris, and was labeled the wickedest man in the world. As a young man, he joined a religious order called the Golden Dawn. The order believed that humans were only part way up the ladder of psychical evolution, and that if properly disciplined, the human will was capable of anything it wished, most notably contacting intelligences that existed outside the physical realm. To communicate with these beings, members performed rituals intended to alter their consciousness and to allow them to tune their minds. On a trip to Egypt, Crowley claimed to hear the voices of the Egyptian gods, and he wrote these revelations down into a manuscript he called the Book of the Law, or the Law of Thelema. Afterwards, he left the Golden Dawn and joined the Ordo Templi Orientis, or the OTO, and seized control. The order's highest grades involved tantric exercises referred to as sex magic. The OTO believed sexual ecstasy could lift you to a different plane of consciousness. As the OTO grew, Crowley sent a disciple of his, Wilfred T. Smith, to Los Angeles to open another lodge, of which Smith would become the high priest. Parsons was intrigued, and he wrote to his wife Helen, "Rocketry may not be my true will, but it's one hell of a powerful drive. With Thelema as my goal, and the stars as my destination and my home, I've set my eyes on high." And he would invoke Pan, the wild horn god of fertility, before each rocket test. And with these prayers, a revelation came to him. After months of constant failure, Parsons discovered the issue with his rockets. While left in storage, the rocket's fuel would contract and expand in the weather, causing breaks within the tightly packed powder. This was due in part by the ammonium nitrate in the mixture. The fix for this would come to him on a stroll through Caltech campus when he saw asphalt being poured. Parsons mixed liquid asphalt with the fuel mixture and poured it into the rocket chamber, and it worked. He demonstrated the new rockets to the Navy, and it was a success. And as the country pushed towards World War II, the group was given $3 million to develop 100 JATO rockets and 1 year to do it. And to handle the increased workload, Parsons, Foreman, and Molina formed the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, or JPL. And as their work expanded, Parsons became less and less involved with day-to-day construction. And this extra time allowed Parsons to devote more attention to his newfound religion. Parsons invited the cult to move into his home in Pasadena. As the church grew, Parsons began a sexual relationship with his wife's sister, Betty, and encouraged Helen to do so with the other men residing in the home. And in 1942, the Church of Thelema planned a party for the fall equinox. It was one of the few times that Parsons mixed company with his co-workers and fellow cult members. The party ended with a drunken spectacle as guests stripped off their clothes and jumped naked over a fire. Fire dancing is a pagan fertility ritual, and it apparently worked, as 5 members of the church became pregnant afterwards, one of whom was Parsons' own wife, Helen. However, Parsons wasn't the father. Church leader Wilfred Smith was. When Aleister Crowley learned of this, he was infuriated and banished Smith from the church. Both Smith and Helen left the house and moved to Malibu, but Parsons' relationship with the church would be further disrupted by the arrival of L. Ron Hubbard, the father of Scientology. At the time of L. Ron Hubbard's arrival in the summer of 1945, he was not the leader of a worldwide religion. He was just a sci-fi writer with a few published stories in pulp magazines. But like almost all cult members, Hubbard had a magnetism that was hard to resist, and the dynamics within the house again shifted. Parsons quickly became enamored with Hubbard and his knowledge of Crowley and his magic, and shared much of what he had learned with him. Now, whether intentional or not, Hubbard began a relationship with Betty, Helen's sister, and it swiftly blossomed into a deeper, more intense relationship than anyone could have anticipated. And for the first time, Parsons began to feel the pangs of jealousy. He funneled his tense energy into the darker aspects of magic and attempted to conjure demonic spirits. One night, a member of the house woke up to some disturbing noises. She said it sounded like someone was dying. And as she approached Parsons' bedroom, she peeked through a crack in the door and saw him standing naked, chanting an ancient liturgy. Scattered on the floor around him were documents scrawled with the same language. And as he spoke, Parsons painted a pentagram in the air and then began to masturbate onto the papers, hoping to impregnate the pages with his essence and bring his elemental, Babylon, to life. According to Parsons, Babylon is the Gnostic Sophia, the mother of knowledge, who was shunned by John the Apostle. To find Babylon was to find his way into the gates of knowledge. As Parsons delved deeper into the dark magic, weird and inexplicable things began to happen inside the house. A violent windstorm appeared within the walls and disappeared just as quickly. There were strange knocks and faulty electricity. There was even a lamp that was thrown across the room with no one near it. And at one point, Hubbard claimed to have been attacked by a spirit that left his arm numb for the rest of the night. Feeling as though he was making progress within the spiritual realm, Parsons enlisted the help of Hubbard as a scribe and seer. Together they began to perform a series of ritual acts to invoke Babylon, and Hubbard soon claimed to have been given a vision for Parsons, that of a beautiful woman riding naked on a great cat-like beast. Hubbard and Parsons traveled to the Mojave Desert to continue their ritual practices in hopes of bringing this about. At the same time as Hubbard and Parsons were in the Mojave Desert, a 23-year-old red-headed bombshell walked through the doors of their home. Her name was Marjorie Camerson, or Candy for short. And when Parsons returned, he exclaimed that he had found his elemental, and he took Candy to his room and began to perform sex magic with her. They didn't leave the room for weeks. Parsons wrote to Crowley, "Glory, I cry, glory unto the beast and unto Babylon, and hail to the crowned and conquering child. Babylon is incarnate upon the earth today, awaiting the proper hour for her manifestation. And on the day my work will be accomplished, and I shall be blown away upon the breath of the Father." By June 1946, Parsons sold the house on Orange Grove, and the remaining members of the church dispersed. Prior to leaving, Hubbard and Betty persuaded Parsons to invest all his money into a joint venture. Hubbard and Betty would fly to Miami, buy 3 yachts, sail them back to Los Angeles, and sell them for a profit. But it wasn't long after they left that Parsons started to think that he had been swindled. He attempted to contact Betty and Hubbard, but had no success. He flew to Miami, but when he arrived, Parsons learned that Betty and Hubbard had already left, sailing towards South America. Filled with desperation and despair, Parsons locked himself into his hotel room and drew a pentagram on the floor. He performed the invocation to Bartzabal. At the exact same time, Hubbard and Betty's yacht was struck by a squall, damaging the ship and forcing them to return to port, where Parsons was waiting for them. Hubbard agreed to return a portion of Parsons' money, and Parsons left for Los Angeles. They would never see each other again. As the war winded down, the Red Scare began, and the FBI opened investigations into Parsons and his associations with communist organizations prior to the war. He was quickly listed as an undesirable, and he lost his security clearances that he had gained during the war. Candy left him a month later. Parsons, now alone and unemployed, moved into the coach house at 1071 Orange Grove in Pasadena and threw himself deeper into his sex magic, hiring prostitutes to carry out his work as he was attempting to become the master of the temple. To support himself, he was prone to taking odd jobs, working on explosives for film studios, stashing a variety of volatile substances inside his living space. On June 17, 1952, Parsons accepted a rush job from the Special Effects Corporation. As Parsons lay dying on the floor of the coach house, his last words were purported to be, "I wasn't done." There was no funeral, his body was cremated. Candy spread his ashes around the Mojave Desert, in the exact same location where he had believed he had conjured her. Jet Propulsion Laboratory became a giant in aerospace and defense. Among its creations was the propulsion system for the Apollo spaceflights. And in 1972, the International Astronomical Union in France honored Parsons by naming a crater on the moon after him, called Parsons Crater. In researching this episode, we relied on the books Sex and Rockets, The Occult World of Jack Parsons by John Carter, and Strange Angel, The Otherworldly Life of Rocket Scientist John Whiteside Parsons by George Pendle. Links to these sources can be found in the show notes. Thank you for joining us tonight on the Ritual Rewind. And as always, please leave a review, tell a friend, and subscribe. You can interact with us at The Ritual Rewind on Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook. And as this is a podcast about when cassette culture met cult culture, stay tuned for this week's movie pairing after this short break. This week's film pairing is actually a TV show called Strange Angel, based on the book by George Pendle and produced by Paramount Plus. It lasted 2 seasons and 17 episodes before being abruptly canceled after the introduction of L. Ron Hubbard at the end of season 2. The production values are fantastic and the acting is superb. It's an atmospheric period piece with great film noir vibes, and the show does play fast and loose with the facts. It does get Parsons' recklessness, his bravado, and his push for greatness. Prior to this podcast, I had watched this series once before, and thanks to my research into Jack Parsons, more things clicked thanks to my subsequent research that initially had just passed over my head on the first viewing. But if I was to be honest, it wasn't worth the rewatch. I would rate this series 2.5 VHS tapes out of 5.